Dear viewers, we have with us National Award-winning director Ashim Ahluwalia, whose films like Miss Lovely have been the toast of several film festivals. Right now, his Netflix series Class is winning many accolades. Welcome, Ashim, and thanks for talking to the
Hi,
Tribune.
hi. Thank you.
The series, I must say, is a very sharp portrait of class divide in India. Uh, at the same time, it has divided the viewers, and many of whom are saying that it's,
Oh,
aisa bhi hota hai kya? And so, what would be your answer to
right.
all those naysayers?
No, I think it's actually very, I'm not surprised to be honest, because I think we've never seen anything like it. So I was expecting quite a polarized response, and generally our films and series tend to be quite fantastical. They're not rooted in the real world so much. So I think sometimes when we do see something that's quite real and hard hitting, generally either you have a certain kind of audience that says thank you, for being, reflecting where we are, or you have another kind of audience that says, it's too much, don't show it to me, I don't want to know this, right? And I think it really depends on the kind of media and film that interests you. If you want something that's in fantastical and that is not about the real world, then this is not for you. But if it is about where things are at now. I think we know, we can just Google any Delhi school scandal, any MMS scandal. We know that this stuff exists. You just open the newspaper. You don't have to be. It's not like buried under a rock. It's right there in public domain. So we know that this is not a surprise. We know stories about rich people going over the edge and running over someone, or I mean, we're seeing this stuff all the time in the news. It's just that when we show it as a series, sometimes people just feel like maybe it's too much reality or something like that. But yeah, it's all very real, in that sense.
And younger generation, of course, is relating more to it than the older one. Do you think so?
Yes, yeah, I think for sure, because I think younger people are generally more exposed to a kind of global media environment. I think they're watching stuff that's outside of the realm of Bollywood, or just like what we're used to. I think so. Having said that, I'm not surprised that the younger people are actually connecting with it. They feel, a lot of people say that, like, I get the amount of messages I've got on this series from young people that are like either coming out, or they're struggling with their homosexuality with their parents, or they're struggling with bullying in school, or cyber bullying, or whatever. It's unbelievable. So many people feel like they've just been represented for the first time, and that's been really nice. So
And
yeah, yeah.
any
Sorry, go
one
ahead.
message that you would like to share?
Well, I had one message which said that that I've been in the closet for a long time. I'm in love, and I've had a very similar story to Dhruv and Farooq. And I wanted to talk to my parents about it. I've thought about committing suicide so many times, etc. And this show comes out, and now we are able to have a conversation about this at the dining table, in my house. And just because my parents were able to somewhat enter this show through, out of curiosity, and now there's a kind of empathy. So although I've not come out yet, thank you so much for representing my world, because I feel like otherwise there was no way to even have these conversations. So I think I'm seeing a lot of this kind of stuff, that there's a conversation beginning, and it's about, I think another generation maybe who were not aware of what was happening, suddenly opening up to, oh my God, this is what the kids are up to, this is what they're doing. And I think that's really, I mean, I see that
But
as
this
positive.
this is a question that I reserved for later. But since bringing this up, but gay angle has almost become de rigueur in Indian cinema and series. But the way you handled it is, you have actually two parts to it. But the central one is, you handled it very beautifully and poetic. I mean, like, uh, you are really, I mean, like, taken in, and you actually root for these two guys.
Yeah,
So was it
yeah,
a
that's
conscious
important.
thing to portray them like this?
Yeah, I think it was a conscious thing to create a world where we could have empathy with all these characters, even the most terrible, seemingly terrible ones. there's something there where you understand that people are not just born like that, right? There's an environment that creates you. There's an environment that allows you or makes you go off the deep end or makes you, go crazy or whatever it may be. I just feel like, I think it's important that sometimes we can just sort of understand the world without judging it. I think that was the idea here.
But talking of empathy, I mean, like, at least I, as a viewer, felt that you were a little harsh on the super rich.
I don't know. You feel like that. I feel like there was also quite an explanation about their world with their parents, and I think for me the harshness was sort of toned down when you see the kids having to navigate the parents and the adult expectations from them. So I feel like these kids are actually also the other circumstances. They're not just, again, I don't think any of these rich kids are just behaving like that. There's a certain expectation in the environments that they might be brought up in that expect them to be a certain way. And I think I've tried to do that as much as possible with the parents, and try and have the parents kind of represent in a way the world at large, that they have to, the forces that they have to deal with.
There's one particular scene where this girl is being, totally bitchy and she's miserable. And yeah, the next moment she puts on her lipstick and then she poses for Instagram, all those happy pictures. I thought that was a very well portrayed scene about, vulnerability and fragility of this generation.
Yeah, that's the only scene that was never written in the screenplay. We just made that up on the spot while we were shooting, and it's my favorite scene in the series somehow. It just was so real, and it felt so like, I think a lot of people have related to that moment because it is so symbolic.
But you, I mean, like, what made you stay to an adaptation? Because you're so much a, original guy for us.
I never saw this as when I should say that I never seen the original. I had actually been keen to do something about rebellious teenagers because I've been a rebellious teenager myself. I felt like we didn't have much material on teenage life, right? On badly behaved teenage life. I said, and there's so many teens go through so many emotions, we can all relate to that. So I've always had this interest. And then somebody, a production company brought this project to me, and Netflix was interested and asked me, would you like to look at this as a series adaptation? I've never done a series. And I'd never seen it, and I watched it and I thought, okay, this is very not my zone at all. It was very glossy, the Spanish one, and it was very different from the kind of stuff I make. It's not, very realistic in that sense, etc. But there was something about the dynamics of the characters and the plot that was really interesting in the original. I said there's something about the haves and have-nots and the way they're very unpredictable here. You expect the rich to be the bad guys and the poor to be the innocents and all, and it doesn't really play out like that. It goes all over the place. You don't expect it to go the way it does. And I said, this could be really interesting if Netflix lets me have my own vision on this adaptation. If they let me do my own thing with it, it could be really interesting because it's an adaptation. It allows us to even attempt these themes. Otherwise, in India, I think it would have been very difficult to even have these conversations. So that's number one. I think the reason I said yes to it is because I thought, okay, the plot could be, we could use the plot like the way you use the plot of, Hamlet or an Othello or whatever, or a mythological story. The outcome. It doesn't matter. What happens doesn't matter. It's how you tell the story. And I was more interested in how you tell the story. That's really where I was coming from with this.
But adapting it to the Indian milieu, I mean, was that the toughest part, and how much research went into it?
See, I knew that if we were doing something, so the first thing was that I said, I don't want to make a show called Elite because I don't want to make a show about the elite. I want to make a show called Class because I want to make a show about class and about the interactions of the class. So that's a big switch in the gaze from the Spanish to ours. Ours is about this interaction, these worlds coming together, either in conflict or in solidarity, whatever they may be. So I think that was the first thing, is to change that. And then the minute you go into class in India, you can't not address caste, because that's always the elephant in the room, that we are not really, and they are separate. They're not the same thing. So it becomes way more complex in India when you start getting into the haves and have-nots, because there's so many layers of those, right? So that was something that I wanted to address. Caste. I wanted to address also, a lot of this other stuff that's happening right now in our country, in our society. We're a society in transition. I think we grew up in a time when it was socialist India. It was before things opened up. Now suddenly things have opened up, and India is just escalating. Like the wealthy are getting super, super wealthy. Sometimes the poor are getting super poor. So the extremes are exaggerated. So I really wanted to show that we could sort of talk about some of these things without being preachy, of course. I didn't
So,
want to
yeah.
preach.
Apart from class, caste, there is, I mean, there is religion too. So do you think
Yeah.
that was kind of biting into more than one can chew in a series, even if it's a long format?
Yeah. Yeah. No, so I think that's also like one of the criticisms that, oh, is that there's so many themes and we didn't address the themes. But the reality is that I never wanted to make a show about any of these themes. I wanted to make a show about a high school, which just happened to have kids that came from different backgrounds. So I'm not making a flag waving agenda show like, okay, this is my take on religion today or caste today. I'm not interested in that as a theme. It's actually, for me, the show is really about these kids. They just happen to be from different environments, from different spaces with different conflicts. And I thought, why do we always either not show anything of anyone's background and we just whitewash backgrounds like as if nobody has any caste, class, religion, nothing, if it's in the case of mainstream stuff, or we do only flag waving stuff that this is an identity politics, film. This is about caste. This is about, So I thought, what about just normal kids who happen to have backgrounds and they have to deal with those backgrounds? They come with those backgrounds. How about that? So it's sort of, in a way, never meant to be. It was never meant to be some manifesto on any of these things. Just a
But,
reflection of us.
but did you feel a similarity with the kind of theme Parasite, the South Korean movie, explode in the sense that, when rich
Yeah.
and poor come together, there
Yeah.
is always a
Yeah.
violent clash rather.
Yeah. I
So,
mean, I'm a big fan of Parasite. I love Korean cinema. That's really the space I come from in terms of my influences. My influences are not Bollywood, they're not Hollywood, they're really Asian cinema. And that's what I've always been interested in. So like Parasite is something that, I could totally relate to as a film. I felt like that could happen in India, even though it's of course very hyper real. Like it's something that we know this world, right? And I just feel like filmmakers, I mean, maybe in India, we just haven't addressed this stuff enough. We're always looking elsewhere. We're always trying to sort of forget where we are. And I think it's interesting because where we are is fascinating. And it's really interesting to make stuff about, where we are, because we're a very complex society. So it makes for lots of drama, lots of conflict, really.
and also the fact that you studied in New York, how much does that inform your work?
See, I think that definitely makes me less Bollywood centric in my aesthetic, because what happened is very early on I got exposed to world cinema, and ironically, like say like all the Indian cinema that I never knew about, I only saw when I was in film school in New York. It was ironic. I never saw Ray, I never saw Ghatak, I never watched any of that stuff when I lived in India. And India, it was always Bollywood, because I grew up in Bombay. But the minute I went to the US and I was in film school, people were shocked. They were like, "You've never seen a Ray film? You've never seen Pothir Panchali? You've never seen any of this stuff?" And that's ironically where I got exposed to not just Indian cinema, but Asian cinema. And I ended up watching a lot more Asian cinema and getting exposed to a window of other stuff. So yes, that definitely impacted the vision through which I'd like to make films. I'm not coming at it really from the Bollywood lens, I would say.
In Miss Lovely, you worked with Nawazuddin. Daddy, you had Arjun Rampal, and
Yeah.
you have fresh cast. So one
Yeah.
big advantage of having fresh faces, and one minus probably.
See, actually, when I worked with Miss Lovely and on Miss Lovely, Nawazuddin Siddiqui had never done a lead role. So actually, he's no different from the kids that were here. It was his first lead before even Gangs of Wasipur or any of the other films that he did. He had actually never done a lead. So he was completely random for me when I cast him. And it was actually for the very same reason that I cast these kids, that I want faces with no baggage. In this case, especially because you're doing a young adult show, I didn't want famous kids. I was very clear, no famous people, nobody that you recognize from other shows, because I think what that does is it brings in another meta text of like where they've worked elsewhere or what they've done, and you kind of link it back to other things you've seen of theirs. In this case, I wanted absolutely fresh faces that, could just become the characters themselves in a way. And of course, that's hard because, when you work with kids that are non-actors, they've never walked alongside a camera, they don't even know camera positions, they get nervous, they go out of character, etc. That's one of the downsides. But the flip side is that once you you have the patience and you can tap, I mean, I became like a family member. I became daddy for them. They used to call me daddy on set. It was kind of funny. And I became this guy who was both very strict about it. I was like, listen, I can't make you guys look horrible. It'll be terrible for you guys because you're going to get compared to the original characters and Lite. You're going to have, there's going to be a lot of eyes on you. So there is a responsibility I have to not make you guys look like you couldn't pull it off. So we really going to push. And at the same time, you have to be loving and like parental, in terms of at least making sure that they feel secure on set. There's sexual scenes, there's all kinds of stuff that they've never done, and they're really eager to do. But they need guidance. And I think when I see them now, I feel really proud because I think they pulled off amazingly authentic, performances. They're incredible.
Yeah, except for Gur Fateh Pirzada, who happens to be
Yeah,
from
Good
Chandigarh.
Fateh,
Yeah.
Oh, really?
He's from
Good Fateh was the only guy who actually had done anything before. Good Fateh had done something before. And actually, Good Fateh had the hardest time with me. I'll be honest, because the other kids were all people that I knew that I could mold. With Good Fateh, I think I started with that thing saying, Good Fateh, you're going to be Bollywood, you're going to be filmy. Don't do it, man. And, we started on that note. And I think Good Fateh worked harder than anybody else to prove me wrong. Just to say, no, I know what you want. And I'm going to really work to kind of negate that impression you have of me as a filmy guy or whatever. And he was really great. He worked very hard. So, it was
Yeah,
really
I
a
think
pleasure to work
he's
with him.
one of the most endearing characters in the series.
He's great. Yeah.
But most series, create, of course, part of it also is because, they have known faces, create a lot of buzz before the release. This is one of the rare series which is creating more buzz after the release. Again, that was a
Yeah.
deliberate thing. You didn't want to go in for too much publicity prior to the release.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, when you build up publicity, sometimes you can build an expectation of something, and then you disappoint an expectation. I would rather not disappoint the expectation and just let people discover it for themselves. And what I think is really amazing about this series, and I don't know if this has happened before in India, is the amount of word of mouth buzz on this is incredible. It's all recommendations of people saying to someone, "Have you seen this? Have you not?" And I think that's the greatest kind of publicity. And I think the only publicity I wanted to do was basically where I could talk about the making of it, like I'm doing with you, about some of these ideas, because people have asked me, and the audiences have become really sophisticated. I mean, I would have not expected this when I made Miss Lovely 10 years ago. The audience was not ready for something like this, so that's a huge shift, I feel.
In fact, that was going to be my next question, But why do you think audiences have changed? To what would you
I think
attribute?
yeah, lots of things have happened. I think what's happened is primarily the old Bollywood system has collapsed in a very big way, in the sense that the old tentpole summer films, we are seeing Pathan, but that's a unique, it's an oddity in terms of as a format. It's not the normal average Bollywood film. The Bollywood star system has collapsed, and we can see that across the board. The younger audiences have started watching a lot of international content on OTT. Theatrical distribution has collapsed. There's a huge push of South films in terms of national distribution, which we never saw before. So now people are getting access to films from the South, which were being remade in Bollywood for a long time, and now people would rather just see the original ones. So those stars have now kind of risen. So a lot of there's a huge seismic shift in our entertainment industry. There's a lot of regional content. And of course, there's the rise of OTT, which allows you to get access to everything from everywhere in the world at the same time. And then you're on the internet, so you also can follow those actors or those filmmakers or those shows. So it's a huge shift in terms of the access and exposure for the audience. These guys are not going to be just satisfied with those same 6 songs and the same action sequences and all. It's not going to work anymore, and I'm actually very glad for that. I predicted that 10 years ago. Honestly, it just took longer than I thought for it to collapse, but it's the greatest thing that can happen because it's liberating.
But critics love you, box office not so much. Do you think OTT is the best platform for you then?
See, I think OTT, the reason why OTT is better for filmmakers like myself is just simply because the audiences can be very specific. They can be very niche. What happens with distribution, and I've always said this, and this is kind of the problem that happened with Daddy as well, is that Daddy did really, really well in Maharashtra, in certain key states, and in the North, it didn't work because it was too regional. It was too specific of a Bombay story, right? So what happens is, I think because the old distribution system in Bollywood was just, it was meant for the big Amitabh Bachchan film. It was designed like that. It was meant to be 5,000 screens, everybody watches the same thing. And now audiences have become so segmented, like what they want to watch is very different. We never had genres. When I was growing up, there was no genre. Like every film was all genres, right? It was a musical, it was a thriller, it was action, it was everything. Now, if I want to watch action, yeah. So I think the old Bollywood system was designed for old Bollywood films that were multi-genre films. And my work is very niche. It works for certain kinds of audiences, certain kinds of people. It can't just be blasted out to 5,000 screens. It's not going to work in that capacity. And that's true of most people making stuff today, I think, you know.
And talking of class, there's a lot of bold content, to so to say, to
Yeah.
use for want of
Yeah.
better word. And I mean, nudity, you show it and we see it, but Indians are rather squeamish about watching nudity. Even today,
Yeah.
after having watched so much of OTT content, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to Indian series, we can watch it if it's an international series, but somehow we become all uppity when it comes to Indian scenes. Were you apprehensive about that when you were filming these scenes, especially with
Yeah.
younger actors?
Yeah. See, one of the key things that I was take away from the Spanish show was that the Spanish show had a lot of nudity, and one of the things I wanted to do was to explore young sexuality, but not with nudity. I was actually quite particular that I did not want any real nudity in it. So even though there are scenes that are of sexual nature, there's no nudity. And the reason for that was that I realized that in our OTT platforms and our audiences, there's a tendency to sort of skim through to look at nude material and just pick the sex scenes and take them out of context from the whole. And I was very clear that I'm not going to have my work be read like that. That if you want to get into the material, then the material is part of the story and it's part of the characters. So that's why I think we've not had a lot of complaints that it's exploitational or it's voyeuristic, because the sexual material is very much embedded and part of the storylines, part of the characters. So that was a very conscious decision not to just make like a controversial sexy show with nudity and all, because that I thought that's a disrespect to my own work, frankly speaking. I didn't want to do that. As for the younger actors, they were very aware of what the show was, the original show, and I had obviously spent a lot of time with them saying, this is how I want to shoot these scenes. There won't be nudity, but some of them I want them to be a bit racy. This is how we want to do it. What do you think? So there was a lot of conversation. We also had an intimacy coordinator, Asta Khanna, who's sort of the best intimacy coordinator, the business on set, who was actually making it much more comfortable, making it a very safe space. See, I've understood this because since Miss Lovely, I've been dealing with sexuality in film, and it's not every day. I don't the environment where you have a lot of people standing around or people are uncomfortable, that doesn't appeal to me. I need it to be a space where everybody's cleared off the set, there's a conversation possible, and if somebody is not comfortable with something, they feel very comfortable saying to me that, look, I don't like the way this is being shot, or my co-actor is behaving in a strange way, or whatever. There has to be that openness and that safety. And I think with these kids, I had a lot of trust, and they had a lot of trust with me. So I think we were able to do that.
Once you said that you don't want to create heroes or villains. I'm not talking about villains, but don't you think the world needs heroes?
The world needs heroes, but not in the way we make them in films. I think we need human beings actually who are rounded. And I think what happens is when you go into these binaries, when you create binaries in film, it makes the way we view the world very simplistic, very childlike. Because as you know, in our daily lives, when we look at everybody around us, even our mentors, nobody is a pure hero and nobody is a pure villain. There's always shades of gray. There's always something that, somebody, I might think my dad is the greatest ever, but I can still see, yes, there are flaws, there are issues here. It's not entirely great. And I think when we mature as an audience, That's my belief, that when we mature as an audience, we are able to appreciate characters, not just good and bad, but maybe characters that meant to be good that ended up being bad, or that ended up being doing things that they shouldn't have done, that really were on the right path but got misled. See, I'm interested in those things because those are very human emotions, and I feel like I don't believe in those cutout, superhero type characters that don't like look like they're living and breathing. So that's just a personal choice. I don't think anybody is truly heroic ever, and they can still
And
be heroes for us.
yes. And talking of the dark themes of your, movies or series,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
why does darkness fascinate you more than?
Well, actually, the thing is, it doesn't fascinate me that much more than everyday life. Like, if we just open the newspapers, I find the newspapers being much darker than any show that we see. So, my point is, I often get this question like, why is your work so dark? I'm like, have you just opened the paper this morning? Have you just looked at, like, where we are at, not just as a country, but as a human species, like what's happening on this planet? So for me, I think I just reflect what I'm interested in, reflecting what's around us. If we were living in a planet which was like, taking care of its environment, and we were all happy, and we were not all killing each other, and there was no war, and it was great, all my films would be really happy. But they just reflect, what I see. So I don't believe, and I don't think I'm very pessimistic, because I feel like the work that I make is generally actually kind of celebrating that despite all of this, despite all of this, there is always some kind of hope. I'm quite idealistic like that, actually.
And is second season in the offing?
I'm sure, because I think I don't think anyone is expecting how successful this has become. I think they were not. Netflix was definitely not 100% sure. It's been very successful, and I'm sure there will be a second season. And I'm sure somebody will take these stories forward. I'm not sure if I want to do another young adult thing right away. I probably want to move on to something different, because I get I get bored of the same thing. I always want to try new things. And I don't know if I would have more to contribute in this space. So maybe not me, but I'm sure somebody will take it forward, and it'll continue.
And for our Punjabi viewers, I mean, your surname Ahluwalia, you are Punjabi, right?
I'm half Sardar. My dad's a Sardar, but he, in fact, he grew up. I mean, he spent most of his time in Bombay. I'm pretty much a Bombay boy. So although I have a Sardar last name, I don't speak Punjabi, although I can understand all the swear words and lots of galis I can understand. But otherwise, I don't have. I have not had a very strong link per se. I grew up in Bombay, so.
So you're saying that you will not be directing the second season. What can we expect from you in future?
Yeah, so just saying that, right now I'm sort of in the process of working on my first international feature, which is the first thing I'm making, which is not based in India. It's an English language film, but it's set about 60 years in the future, so it's a slightly I would say it's sci-fi in a way, but it's still very much my own weird thing. So that's quite exciting, but it's a complicated film. It's set in many multiple countries, so it's a large film to finance and stuff like that. So it's taking a little bit of time, but that's what I'm working on. And there are always things that are in development, but that's basically it. So right now, no more young adult for a while until I find something very different.
But something on OTT for sure. I mean, like more series from you.
I think so at some point. I have to find something. Series are really hard to make. Firstly, because I'm quite a control freak. I can't just let other people do it. I'm a little bit like, and the scale is very big. So when you're in a series, you're making a series like this. It's like this was 2.5 years of my life, like every day. So you kind of have to really believe in something to do it. I don't make it like a TV series in that sense. I still work on it like film. So it's very sort of, you have to really be convinced that this is a thing that you can spend that kind of time in your life on.
Yeah. Talking of making it like a film, I mean, one hasn't seen this kind of cinematography in a series so far. I believe you had 5 cinematographers, and as we say, too many books spoil the broth. How did you divide the work?
It's a good question. See, it was never intended to be like this. It was meant to be a lot simpler, but we were meant to have two cinematographers and two episode directors who were working under me, who were following certain strands of the story, not doing the episodes, but Kabir Mehta, who has worked with me as a director in his own right, was going to be doing the rich kids, and he's sort of from Delhi and he knows that world. And there's a director called Gul Dharmani, and she was going to follow the Nupur Khatola kids from the poorer side of the fence, and she's kind of understood that milieu better. So that was the original plan. But of course, what happened is it became too big. We had 3 waves of pandemic. The schedule just went crazy, and so as a result, we ended up. The two DPs that I had, the two original DOPs, they had to go back. The one was Swedish, the other was Spanish, and she had to go back because they had other commitments. Then I was like, okay, we don't have a DP. So essentially, it was like keeping it going through the pandemic to shoot this. We shot this 2.5 years in Delhi, at the in this extreme Delta wave. So it was not easy to make this. So finally, it ended up being just primarily me knowing exactly what was happening, and everybody was just a part of the puzzle. But I'm very happy because the 5 DPs, you can't tell who shot what. It's very consistent across the entire show. And I think that's because in my mind, it was very clear what it was meant to look like, So not easy to make this really, but I'm happy with the outcome.
You're an ad filmmaker as well?
I do commercials. Yeah, I do ads, like sort of bread and butter stuff. But I like doing ads in between because it allows me to then make more risky films or more risky series. I don't have to do such commercial work because I can make commercials and I earn my living there. So I'm not dependent on having to do like rom-coms for a living.
But does that influence your work somewhere?
I think working on commercials definitely helps with the finish because you understand how to make things that look really tight, if you want them to. So in this case, it kind of used both sides of my filmmaking, the poorer world and the more gritty stuff comes a lot from my feature filmmaking, and some of the very glossy, wealthy, luxury stuff comes from a lot of the commercials I've done. I've done ads for like Mercedes Benz and L'Oreal and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes that glamour stuff that you do, in this case, it worked well for the look for the rich world.
But so, you would,
I mean, I think it helps.
You're talking of the collapse of the Bollywood system. But once there was a clear-cut demarcation line between art house cinema and commercial masala, but do you think that line also has blurred somewhere, or that is yet to happen?
No. I think that's absolutely blurred. In fact, I think that a lot of the directors that are now beginning to work within the Netflix, Amazon paradigm have come from independent cinema, whether it's Patal Lok, it's Avinash Arun, or whoever it is. The most interesting stuff is being made by guys who come from, guys or women or whoever comes from independent cinema. Like these are not mainstream filmmakers. So all the best work in India is being made by independent filmmakers, and it always has been, frankly speaking, and even the ones that make it to Bollywood or mainstream. I mean, let's talk even internationally. Let's talk about Chris Nolan. Chris Nolan is the biggest Hollywood filmmaker. His first film was Following. It was a black and white 16mm film at Sundance. All the big guys, even during the Batman franchises, have started as indie guys, frankly. So that's the reality.
But there was a filmmaker who once said that OTT has done nothing for indie makers. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
See, I don't think OTT has done any more for indie filmmakers than the Bollywood distribution system did for indie filmmakers. I think what you have to realize as an independent filmmaker is no one's going to do anything for you. There's a commercial system at play. There's the sort of standard default thing of these are our audiences. What do we do? That's what they want. That I've been hearing from the time I started making films. This is what our audience wants. Give them what I want. Really. So to those people, I say, I gave them class and they watched it, right? And nobody, and so therefore, I think this whole idea that we second guess our audience, it's ridiculous. I've never believed it. And I think that's the way to make lazy cinema, is that if you just start by saying our audiences are not ready, it's the makers that are not ready, actually. The audiences are more ready than the makers. This is my take. I think they are way more exposed than the people that are making stuff half the time. So I think it's, I think nobody's going to do anything for you as an independent filmmaker. Like, you have to find your way through this maze, honestly.
But I mean, like, you are a Punjabi who doesn't know Punjabi, hasn't grown up in Punjab. But at any point in your life, would you like to make something in Punjabi or for Punjabi audiences or a Punjabi story?
I don't know enough about life in Punjab, but I do think that there's a lot of I mean, there's a lot of amazing stuff that I read in terms of material. I'm very hesitant. I'll be honest. I'm very hesitant to make stuff in a world that I'm not familiar with. If I went and I spent 6 months in Punjab, I'm sure I would want to make something, because then I would feel like I know it. I understand it. So I think I've spent a lot of time. I spent all my summers in Delhi growing up. I had a grandmother who lived in Nizamuddin. She was not, a billionaire. She was a middle class lady, but I had access and exposure to the farmhouse party and the this and the that. So I knew that culture. If I can't make something that I feel like I'm just an outsider visiting, it's hard. But I would love to spend some time in Punjab and make a film there. I mean, it would be amazing, frankly.
So that's happening in real time sometime soon.
I should come and spend some time in Punjab. I'm fed up of Bombay. I think it's a good idea.
And why are you fed up of Bombay? So,
I don't know. It's an exhausting city. I love it a lot, but it's an exhausting city. In terms of making stuff, it's hard. And you're constantly battling to do stuff. Even if you have something successful, the next thing is going to be yet another new battle, right? Every time it's because you're always having to start from zero. That's just the way it is. But it's okay. It's okay.
But after the success of Class, do you think now it will be easier for you to, distribute your films or your work?
It's always easier if you do the same thing. Like, if I do a young adult thing now, yeah, of course, I could do 500 young adult series and it would be fine. But if I say tomorrow I want to make a film about old people, like people over the age of 90, no one's going to fund it. It's the same thing, right? If you change anything that you do in the formula, then immediately they say no. Why don't you just do that? And that's what happens, is that filmmakers or makers just get pushed into doing the same thing again and again and again, because primarily that's the easiest way to get something financed. But it's also, for me, the death of you as a creative person, because that's when you just become mediocre, because you're no longer invested in that anymore.
But the world continues to believe that nothing succeeds like success, but you would rather make your own formula to success, right?
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really nice. From you.
It was really nice.
Yes, thank you.